You and I know gratitude sounds simple until life gets hard. It's easy to thank God when everything is working, when the prayer is answered, when the job comes through, when the relationship is good. But when it's not, when you're disappointed, confused, or heartbroken, that's when gratitude starts to feel like a foreign language. You hear verses like, give thanks in all circumstances, and you think, really? In this? You start questioning, how do I thank God when life doesn't make sense? How do I praise Him when I don't understand His plans? How do I stay grateful when what I hoped for is gone? That's the moment where real gratitude begins. Not when everything is good, but when you decide to trust that God still is. When I think about this kind of gratitude, I can't help but to go back to a moment in my own life when everything I thought I knew about God's plans fell apart. My husband and I were sure we knew what God wanted from us. We felt called to be missionaries in the Amazon. Not just for a few months, we believed this was the call for our lives forever. We sold everything we had, our house, our car, our furniture, everything we had built here. We packed our faith and our excitement and our kids and stepped into what felt like the greatest adventure of obedience. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what we were made for. And for a while, it was beautiful. We were surrounded by people eager to hear about Jesus. We watched God move in ways that can only be described as miracles. We met young adults who were searching, and we poured our heart into serving them. But then, just 4 months later, we were on a plane back to the United States. Not because we wanted to be, not because the mission was finished, but because of a child custody battle that made it impossible for us to stay. It didn't make sense. We were following God. We had left everything. We had said yes. And suddenly, it was over. I remember coming home with this deep ache, feeling like we had felt God somehow, like the dream He gave us had ended too soon. I wrestled with questions for years. Did we misunderstand His voice? Did we do something wrong? Why God sent us just to bring us right back to the same place? For 3 years, we grieved. We grieved the life we left behind, the purpose we thought we had lost. We grieved the people we loved there. And honestly, I grieved the version of myself that was so sure I knew what God was doing. But over time, as I look back on that season, I began to see something I couldn't see back then. God had not rejected our calling or changed His mind. He was refining it. That experience didn't destroy our purpose, it deepened it. Because if we hadn't gone through that season, I wouldn't be the pastor that I am today. I wouldn't have the same compassion, the same understanding, the same burden for young adults. What I thought was an ending was actually preparation. And the very thing that broke me became the soil where God grew something new. That's what gratitude does. It doesn't erase the pain. It transforms the way you see it. When Paul wrote, give thanks in all circumstances, he understood this truth deeply. He wasn't speaking from comfort or safety. He was speaking from struggle. Paul wrote to the Thessalonian church around the year AD 50, to people who had chosen to follow Jesus in a world that was hostile to their faith. These believers were young in their faith. They were losing jobs, facing persecution, and being pushed out of their communities. Their decision to follow Christ cost them everything. So imagine receiving a letter from Paul that says, give thanks in all circumstances. That must have sounded impossible. Paul knew what he was talking about. He wasn't asking them to deny their pain. He was teaching them to look for God's presence in it. By the time he wrote to the Colossians, Paul was sitting in a Roman prison. He had been beaten, betrayed, falsely accused. He had every reason to give up. And still he wrote, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts and be thankful. Paul's gratitude was not emotional. it was theological. He didn't thank God because life was easy. He thanked God because he had learned that no matter where he was, God was still with him. His gratitude wasn't denial, it was defiance. It was a declaration that said, you can chain my body, but you can't chain my faith. That's the kind of gratitude that changes how you live. Gratitude changes the way you see. When you thank God, you begin to notice things you missed before. You start to see his fingerprint in places that once looked like a failure. When I came back from the Amazon, I didn't see any of that at first. I only saw loss. But over time, I began to realize that God was still working, just in different ways. He was developing something in me, a deeper trust, a stronger faith, a clearer calling. I thought I was going there to serve, but God used that season to teach me dependency. He stripped away what I thought defined me so I could discover what I really was in him. Gratitude began to grow in me when I started thanking God, not for what I lost, but for what he was still doing. And maybe that's what he's trying to teach you. Sometimes the very thing you are asking God to take away is the thing he's using to grow your faith. Sometimes the prayer you think he ignored is the one he's using to prepare you. Gratitude doesn't change God, it changes how you see him. When Paul tells us to give thanks in all circumstances, he's not calling us to fake it. He's calling us to remember who is still in control. Because gratitude is not pretending life is good. It's about proclaiming that God still is. Gratitude isn't weakness, it's worship. Every time you thank God in a hard season, you're declaring your trust in his character more than your comfort. And that kind of gratitude builds spiritual muscles. It strengthens your faith because it forces you to depend on what you know about God, not what you feel in that moment. When you look at Joseph in Genesis, you see a man who understood this. Sold by his brothers, falsely accused, imprisoned for years. But when he finally stood before them, he didn't seek revenge. He said, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That is gratitude, not denial, not pretending. But recognize that God can take what was meant to harm you and use it to heal you. So how do we live that kind of gratitude? Not the easy kind, not the polite kind, but the kind that transforms the way we think, live, and see. First is slow down. Notice how we live in a world that moves too fast. Most of us wake up, checking up message, rushing through the day and collapsing into bed. Gratitude doesn't grow in that kind of pace. You have to pause long enough to see what God is doing. Try this. At the end of your day, write 3 things you're thankful for. And don't make them generic. Be specific. Write it down. The conversation that made me laugh. The moment that I felt God's peace when I was anxious. The person who checked in on me when I felt forgotten. Gratitude grows when you notice details. Second, thank God before you understand it. This one is hard, but this is where faith matures. When Paul thanked God in prison, he didn't know how his story would end. He just knew who was in it with him. Jesus did the same thing. At the Last Supper, before the cross, he took the bread, gave thanks, and broke it. He thanked the Father knowing that suffering was ahead. Gratitude before understanding. That's faith. Maybe the prayer today isn't, "God, explain this to me," but "God, help me thank you while I wait." Third, express it. Gratitude kept inside dies there. Gratitude expressed become a blessing. Say thank you. Send that message. Let people know how they've impacted your life. The more you express gratitude, the more it shapes your heart. When you practice gratitude towards others, you start seeing them differently. You start seeing God's grace in them. That's why Paul wrote, whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God, the Father, through him. Because gratitude isn't just a moment. It's a lifestyle of worship. When I look back now in the Amazon experience, I still remember the pain, but I also remember the peace that came later. The way God began to piece things together in a way that I never could have planned it. I realized that if we had stayed there, I might have missed what God had next. The people he would place in my life, the ministry he was calling me to build, the passion for young adults he was preparing in me. I thought I had lost everything. But in truth, God was giving me something greater, a deeper purpose, a stronger faith, a clear understanding of his goodness. Sometimes gratitude is only visible after we walk through the valley. It takes time to see what God was doing in the dark. But when you do, gratitude becomes your response to grace. So what does this mean for you today? Maybe you're in a season that doesn't make sense. Maybe you feel like God closed the door you thought he wanted you to walk through. Maybe something you were sure was forever ended too soon. What if gratitude is the key to seeing what God is doing behind the scenes? What if the job you lost is making space for something that fits your calling better? What if the relationship that ended is protecting you from something you can't see yet? What if the delay you hate is actually saving you from disappointment? Gratitude doesn't erase the questions. It gives you peace while you wait for the answers. When you start thanking God right where you are, you stop being controlled by what you don't understand. You start trusting the one who understands everything. Gratitude says, I may not like this season, but I know the one who is walking through it with me. And that is what changes everything. Gratitude doesn't just shift your emotions, it shifts your entire spiritual posture. Because when you live with gratitude, you stop seeing life as something happening to you and start seeing as it's something that God is doing in you. You begin to live aware of grace. You start seeing God's fingerprint in the ordinary, in conversations, in interruptions, and in the tours. You begin to realize that the presence of gratitude is proof that God's peace is taking root in your heart. When Paul said, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, that word rule literally means to govern, to lead. In other words, let Christ's peace be the one making decisions for your heart. And gratitude is how that peace takes charge. When you choose gratitude, you're letting peace, not fear, make the call. You're saying, I trust God enough to thank him before I see the outcome. And that's how faith grows. Gratitude doesn't change God, it changes you. It changes how you see, it changes how you love, it changes how you wait. And maybe today, the very thing that is testing you is the same thing God will use to strengthen you. So instead of waiting for everything to get better, what if you started thanking God where you are? Because sometimes the miracle isn't that God changes your situation, it's that he changes your sight. You start to see his grace everywhere, even in the places that once hurt you most. That's the kind of gratitude that changes everything. Now we're moving to the discussion part of our service. This is where we get to talk about what we heard and let it go deeper together. Let's be honest in this space. What does gratitude look like for you right now? Not the easy kind, but the kind that is hard to live out. How do you see God's hand in seasons that didn't go as planned? And next week, we'll continue our series with the message titled, The Power of Giving. Invite a friend, share this link, and remember, gratitude really can change everything.